I'm sorry. But I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. In this world there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate. We think too much and feel too little. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness. Without these qualities, life will be violent. And all will be lost. All will be lost. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die. Dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Will return to the people. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, to do away with greed. Now let us fight to free the world, to fulfill that promise. Let us all unite.
Welcome, folks, to the Corporation Nation radio program. I'm your host, Clint Richardson. Oh, let's see. We're on February 10th, 2014. And my guest today is Dr. Day, Dr. Lorraine Day, medical doctor, in fact. Now, we had Dr. Day on the show, it was a few weeks ago, and we talked all about her wonderful, wonderful testimonial about how she conquered her own cancer, breast cancer, strictly through diet. She bucked the system that she worked for and said, no, I'm not going to submit myself to radiation or cancer or, in this case, even surgery, although I believe that was a small part of it. But for the most part, she healed her body through nutrition. She gave her body what it needed to heal itself. And this is a very, very, very important aspect of the current both nutrition and medical fields, because obviously most of us are not getting what we need to have a healthy body. Now, since we went through that and had such a wonderful conversation, you can see that in the archives, we're going to talk about some different things, because Dr. Day, she's a heck of a researcher. She has another book called Who Rewrote the Bible? And I thought it would be interesting to get into some of the more alternative topics other than the health today. Also, some research into the, I don't know what we call those, the tragedies, the school shootings, and all of these false flags that are happening. Dr. Day has some compelling evidence on those as well. So I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Lorraine Day.
Hello there. Thank you.
Absolutely. So tell us, we were talking a little bit off air about the one of the newer books called Who Rewrote the Bible, and it's pretty, I've always this is always a question that gets rebutted a lot when you say, but what about the original? I mean, don't you really have to go back to the original Bible when it was originally written, not by necessarily a king who uses it to rule people? Don't you really have to go back to the original? You don't know Latin or what was it, Greek, before you could really
Hebrew.
Really know the Bible? And you asked some compelling questions on your website here, which, by the way, is Dr. Day, drday.com. For instance, one of my favorite questions that you ask, because you operate in logic a lot, which I like. If God tells us to love our enemies, why is God going to destroy his enemies in hellfire? I mean, it's a good question.
Okay. First of all, can I make one comment about what you said before, just so the people listening will know? I had to do a lot more than just change my diet in order to get well from cancer. And one reason I found out about all of these things in the Bible, I had been an agnostic for all of my adult life, but knowing everything that every other doctor knows, and knowing that we doctors don't know how to cure cancer or Parkinson's or heart disease or anything else, all we know how to do is give drugs or mutilate your body by cutting off your body parts. I realized that I had to look for information from someone who was a lot smarter than I was. And so not only was I searching the medical literature diligently, And I found a lot of truth that we doctors are never taught. But I also started looking at the Bible because God promises to keep us free from every disease if we follow his laws, commandments, and decrees. You never hear that in a church. You never hear that from any Christian. They don't even know it's there. So here I found a physician, the great physician, God, who says, if you do it my way, you will not have disease. And yet churches are full of people who are sick and dying, so I knew the answer wasn't there. So I started studying the Bible diligently as well as studying the medical literature. And it was by studying those two areas that I learned how to get well. So it takes a lot more than just changing your diet. You have to learn to love your enemies. You have to learn to forgive everyone who's ever wronged you. You have to make a lot of changes in your heart. You've got to get sunlight, fresh air. You've got to exercise properly. You've got to get to bed at the proper time of night. You've got to do all those other things besides that, because at the beginning I just changed my diet, and I was on the right diet, but my tumor returned, and it grew huge on the right diet. So it takes a lot more than that to get well. Now, yes, the Bible, it was written in Greek and Hebrew. And people say, well, I'm not a Hebrew scholar, I'm not a Greek scholar. Neither am I. Neither am I. All right? I don't know how to speak Hebrew and Greek. But fortunately, in this era, we have so many study helps. You can buy at a bookstore, a Christian bookstore, you can buy a Strong's Concordance for, I guess, probably $35, and you can buy an interlinear Bible. And the interlinear Bible has the Hebrew in the Old Testament, the Greek in the New Testament, and then has the English right below each word. And each word in the Hebrew and Greek are numbered, and you can look that number up in Strong's Concordance. Yeah. Now, Strong's Concordance isn't totally accurate because they admit that they translate the words as they are translated in the King James Bible, and that's not always correct. King James ordered a translation of the Bible. The correspondence between him and his translators is available, and what he said was, don't change anything that the people already believe. The translator said, we're not going to translate the word ecclesia as church, and because that's not what it means. It doesn't mean church. And King James says you're going to do as I say. I am the one in control of you, or else you're fired. Maybe he even set off with your head. I don't know, because the kings at that time had that sort of power. But the word church is not in the Bible. The word hell is not in the Bible. The reason you know the word ecclesia does not mean church is because at one time there is a story of Paul when he was in Ephesus, where their livelihood came from making statues of the goddess Diana. And Paul came there preaching about Jesus Christ. And they really got ticked off because they said, you know, this guy's causing all sorts of trouble. He's saying goddess Diana is not the right god to worship, and so let's get him out of here. And a big mob went after him to lynch him. Well, that mob, in the original, in the New Testament, is the word ecclesia. Well, that's clearly not a church. The word ecclesia just means a bunch of people who all agree about the same thing. It doesn't basically mean a church with...
Basically a body politic. It's more politics.
That's right. So if the word is not church, they couldn't use the word church there, so they called it a riotous assembly. But it's the same word as they translate church in every other place. The word bishop is not in the Bible. The word deacon is not in the Bible. These things, the word minister is not in the Bible. The word is actually slave or servant. And they make it minister, so then the hierarchy in the church gets worship. But that's not what the Bible said. The one who, and again, the word is ecclesia, which just means a group of people. You can have people who believe the same way all over the world who don't even know each other. That's an ecclesia. It doesn't mean a building and a hierarchy and somebody telling you what to do. In fact, the present Christian church is the model of...
I apologize, I'm going to cut you off. We're just going to take a short commercial break. We'll be right back. Keep that thought. Stay tuned, folks.
falling bombs. Did you ever wonder why we had to run for shelter when the promise of a brave new world unfurled beneath the clear blue sky?
All right, folks, welcome back to the Corporation Nation. We're talking about the Bible today, and we're going to be talking about some fairly controversial stuff because people just aren't used to hearing the truth about these things. Now, we have King James creating this 1611 authorized version of the Bible. And of course, it's authorized because it literally, this is the process of changing the Holy Bible into the legal fiction Bible, basically, where you start looking up words. Now, what Dr. Day has found is that many of the words that we use in the Bible today were non-existent in the, of course, earlier translations in the back to the original Bible. We had words like hell and other words, which nowadays are defined in our legal dictionaries. Of course, we talked about hell being the prison for debtors under the executure. We talk about words like damnation. When we tear that apart, the etymology of the word, of course, goes back to the 1600s, which is basically to, well, when you put the words together, damn and nation, you're being damned or removed or imprisoned from the nation. You see, these all become legal terms. So what we're talking about today is going actually back to the original text and actually see what the Bible was really about. One of the fascinating things you said in your book is that the word Jew doesn't really exist in the Bible. I find that to be fascinating.
By the way, the word damnation is not in the Bible either.
Yes.
The word is judging. It's not damnation.
Exactly.
It's judging.
Exactly.
God allows us actually to judge ourselves by our works. He allows us to do either good or evil, and we judge ourselves by how we live our lives. So the word is not damnation. There's no damnation in hell. That's a great way to get people into a church. Say, if you're not a member of our church, you're going to hell. Mm-hmm. And that's a very effective way to run a business, which is unfortunately what organized churches are. They're businesses. They're 501c3, tax-exempt businesses. Churches, really, religious organizations don't need to be 501c3s. But under Lyndon Johnson's presidency, they were all encouraged to become 501c3s because they thought that's the only way they could be tax-exempt, but that's not true. So they all ran like sheep to the slaughter to become 501c3. When you are a 501c3, the government can tell you what you can teach and preach and what you cannot
Exactly.
teach.
You're a government person. You're a government corporation.
That's right. Yeah, the head of your church is now the state rather than Jesus Christ. Okay? So, nobody went to church for the first 4,000 years of this Earth's history. Nobody went to church. You look at the Israelites in the wilderness, they had a tabernacle in the wilderness, which was about the size of a small house. And there were over 1 million Israelites in the wilderness. And on top of that, only the priests were allowed inside the tabernacle. If a non-priest went inside the tabernacle, the penalty was death.
Well, this was where the hidden knowledge was, the occult ancient knowledge.
I don't know
was
what
stored.
you mean by that.
Go ahead.
The priests were in the tabernacle, and they were doing God's work in the tabernacle. They were sacrificing. They were what they were being told to do. That's what they were doing. They were asking for remission of sins and all that. But the average person was not allowed. My point is that nobody went inside a church and sat down and heard a sermon for the first 4,000 years of this Earth's history. The first time we see the model for today's Christian church is in the New Testament with synagogues. Now, synagogues existed at the same time that the permanent temple in Jerusalem, which replaced the mobile tabernacle, permanent temple was also small, and only the priests were allowed inside, and God's presence was in that temple. Well, the synagogues were actually the counterfeit religion. They were set up by the Pharisees. God's presence was not in the synagogues. The Pharisees set them up where people did go inside and sit down and listen to man tell them what they should believe about God. And again, in the temple in Jerusalem, where God's presence was, the average person was not allowed to go inside. So people didn't go to church until the Counterfeit organization, religious organization, set up synagogues. Now, they were set up by the Pharisees, who became the killers, or who called for the death, the execution of Jesus Christ. So the model for today's organized church was set up by the enemies of Christ, which is kind of startling to most people.
Well, it is, and it's startling and controversial because, again, I mean, you point to everything within some of these organized churches. Of course, the Catholic Church is the easiest to pick on, I suppose, would be the best way. I mean, all you have to do is ask, well, is Catholic in the Bible? Is Protestant in the Bible? Is Mormon in the Bible? No. Plus, wait a minute. Can you explain to me the Vatican Bank, how that has to do with...
But that's right. It's a business. It's a business.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
You see, Christians, whether they're Catholic or Protestant, and they're becoming closer and closer together. The whole point of the New World Order is to bring all Protestant religions into the Catholic religion, so there will be just one religion, and then the Catholic Church, by the way, is owned and run by the Jews behind the scenes. Pope John Paul was a Polish Jew. Pope Benedict was a German Jew. I haven't been able to look at the lineage yet of Pope Francis, but the Jesuit organization, which really runs the Catholic Church from behind the scenes, the head of the Jesuits is called the Black Pope. His skin is not black, but he's the one who is sort of the undercover Pope and tells the Pope out in front what to do. The Jesuits were also started by a Jew. Ignatius Loyola was a Jew. And they are very, very, I know they run the schools and the academies and many universities, but the blood oath they take is a horrible oath that they'll even kill their own mother to protect the Pope or to protect the church.
Now, are you familiar with the Red Pope as well?
No, I'm not familiar with the Red Pope.
You should look it up. It's actually quite funny because it turns out when you look up the word propaganda, you find that that word actually originates from the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church has the office of propaganda, and it's actually run by the Red Pope. People always point to Bernays as the father of propaganda, but actually it's an office in the Catholic Church since the 1500s, if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
so you have the Black Pope and the Red Pope.
Yeah, I think it was around, I can't remember if it was the 8th century, someplace around there, maybe later than that. It was during the Spanish Inquisition, that's when it was. The Spanish Jews were told by the Catholic Church that if they did not convert to Catholicism, they would be killed. And so International Jewry told them, well, just pretend to convert, let's get inside the church, still do your own Jewish religion quietly, but let's get inside the church and take it over, which is what they did. And
well, now, does this would that assume that the church was at one point in good standing? Because the Catholic Church worships saints and everything. Was the Catholic Church at one time this is always the chicken or the egg, the good or bad
argument. A good place to be.
Yeah. That's the question.
It never really was. It never really was. It just got worse.
So the apologist would say it was taken over, but in reality, it was always a control issue to both control the doctrine, of course, of Christianity and the people.
That's like saying, is it better to be Muslim or is it better to be something else that believes that they have the truth? Christian Church, interestingly enough, there we go again.
Oh yeah, we got music. Sorry. We'll be back, folks. Stay with us.
First of all, let me take just a moment to thank you for allowing me back into your homes. If this is your first time with us, let me extend a personal invitation.
Let's build a happy little cloud. Let's build some happy little trees. There are no limits here. You start out by believing here is a your world. you're the creator. Find freedom on this canvas. Believe that you can do it, because you can do it.
All right, folks, welcome back
Relax.
to the Corporation Nation. My guest today, Dr. Day of drday.com. Lots and lots of credentials and other things about Dr. Day, and you can certainly find all of her books on that website, and there are a lot of them, many about health and her career as a doctor, and many about what we're talking about today, which is very fascinating. Now, you mentioned the Strong's Concordance. Strong's Concordance is actually online for people if you want to look for it. Of course, it's always better to have the original, but it is online if you just search for Strong's Concordance. I want you to tell people exactly what that is. It's actually a very important tool when examining the Bible, obviously, because it's going between Hebrew, Greek, and the English version.
Well, the Strong's Concordance contains every word in the Bible, and it contains all the text that it shows where those words are found in all these texts, such as you take the word church, let's say that, and then it'll give you all the text where the word church is in the Old Testament, and then it'll give you all the text where it's in the New Testament. Again, it defines those words as the King James Bible defines them, but it allows you to look up and see how they came about to call these words what they do. For example, the word apolumi means lost. The parable of the lost sheep is the word apolumi. The parable of the lost coin is the word apolumi. The parable of the prodigal son, which is the lost boy, is apolumi. It is always translated lost in those situations. Now, the lost sheep obviously didn't die. It was found alive. That's why the shepherd had a big party for everybody, because he says, my sheep that is lost I have found. And then the lost coin never had life. It was an inanimate object. So apolumi, lost, cannot mean death, because a coin can't die. And then the prodigal son was a lost boy who was then found and came back to his father. But when the word apolumi is used for a sinner, they make it destroyed. Okay? As though you're going to be deprived of life. Well, clearly it cannot mean that, because the coin never had life, and the sheep didn't die, and the prodigal son didn't die, and yet when they talk about a sinner, the sinner is just lost waiting to be found. He's not destroyed, but that's the way they do it, so they put their own particular slant, and they translate the Bible according to the translators translated according to their own preconceived beliefs. Translators were not inspired. The authors of the Bible were inspired by God, but the translators were not. They did it by committee. So when you start searching all of these things out, it is very interesting, and that's what I found, and I wrote my book, Who Rewrote the Bible, correcting all of these things and showing, and I show right there in Strong's Concordance and in the Interlinear Bible, such as all Bibles say that Jesus was resurrected on the first day of the week, which everybody presumes is Sunday. Well, he wasn't. The words first day of the week or Sunday are never in the Bible. The word is Sabbaton, and it's the Sabbath. And you say, well, that's Sunday. Well, no, that's actually Saturday, because it's the same word that we used when the Pharisees were angry with Jesus and his disciples when they were called threshing grain, when they were eating, when they passed through the fields, when Jesus healed on the Sabbath day. That clearly was not Sunday. And so Jesus was not resurrected on Sunday, because those words, first day of the week or Sunday, never appear in the Bible. So it was an interesting journey. And then you find that most of the doctrines that are taught in the church today are based on these translations that are incorrect. Now, people talk about having eternal life. Well, that concept is in the Bible, but the words eternal, everlasting, and forever are not in the Bible. The place where what we refer to as everlasting life is found in 1 Corinthians, where it says that death will be destroyed or abolished. Death will be destroyed or abolished, and God will be all in all. Well, when death is abolished, that means everybody will be alive, because there'll be no more death. It doesn't say dying will be abolished. It says death will be abolished. That means everybody will be alive, and then God will be all in all. And so when there's no longer death, then everybody will live forever. But that is not the concept that is in the words everlasting and forever, which are not in the Bible. That word is eonian. It is, and an eon has a beginning and an end. The Bible talks about 5 eons of time, and they all have a beginning and an end because the Bible talks about the conclusion of the eons, and yet it's translated world without end. So this is what they've translated all of these concepts, which have actually become doctrines in the Christian church, and they're incorrect.
Well, let me ask you this, because I've often asked this to some of the most fundamental of Christians, and it's always the fallacious answer that it's God's word. The King James Bible is God's word. Of course, back then the king referred to himself as God, so technically that's the Lord God, so that's technically true in that respect. It's the word of man acting as God. But how do you convince people to look at the Strong's Concordance and say, look, compare these words? What is it that you can say to people to actually get them to, it's like asking people to read the Constitution. It's like pulling teeth. How do you get them to actually look at the original?
I don't really worry about that. I don't try to convince people of anything. I just write truth.
Sure.
And I let God open the minds of people and bring them to the truth. Because if a person has a closed mind, they're not going to be interested. You can see their eyes glaze over when you talk to them. Then you just talk about, if it's a woman, you talk about, did you go shoe shopping or something? And if it's a man, you'll talk about the Super Bowl, because they don't want to know. It's just like politics. How many people really want to know about the New World Order and the Bilderbergers and the Club of Rome? And there aren't a lot of people who want to know. It's too scary for them. But there are people who do want to know truth. And so those people will go and they will study, and that's what you and I are here to reach, those people who do want truth.
I agree.
You can't convince somebody who doesn't want to know. So I
agree. And that was a perfect answer to slap me back into my own worldview. I tell this to people all the time, that there is no real movement out there, that the only awakening is in the individual, and you need to start talking to people on an individual level, and not I could talk to thousands of people on this station, but really I need to talk to you personally and explain that I'm talking to you out of love, not trying to sell you something. And that's it's a good answer.
I have twin granddaughters who are almost 3 years old. It would be like talking to them about quantum physics. They just don't understand, At 3 years old, they don't know about that. And when you talk to people whose mind has not been opened by the Lord, you see, people think that if you're very intelligent, then you have a lot of knowledge. Well, yes, you can gain knowledge by your intelligence, but you don't gain wisdom by your intelligence. Knowledge is the collection of facts. People can collect lots of facts, and that's knowledge. But it takes wisdom to take those facts and reach the right conclusion. And wisdom only comes from God. In James 1:5, I think it says that if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally without reproach. But if you really want wisdom and you want to know how to take these facts and put them together, give you a perfect illustration of how organized medicine has no wisdom. They have a lot of facts. In Orthodox medicine, we spend all of our time categorizing diseases and naming them because we can't do anything else. We can't cure them. We can't prevent them because we don't know how to do that in organized medicine. So we categorize them. What we have to do is constantly look for truth. And And if you don't have wisdom, here's the illustration. There was the Pottinger cat study, where they took a bunch of cats, and one group they fed raw meat to, and the other group they fed cooked meat. And then they watched them procreate in the next litter and the next litter. Well, in the first litter of the animals that were eating cooked food, their litters had scraggy coats, and they even had some abnormalities in them.
Dr. Day, we're going to go just to a quick break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.
He's a rebel and a runner. He's a signal turning green. He's a restless young romantic, wants to run the big machine. He's got a problem with his poisons.
All right, folks, welcome back. Today we're talking with Dr. Day from drday.com. I really appreciate you coming in today. Please finish your thought there. At the end, I had to cut you off. I apologize.
The Pottinger cat study was one group of cats was fed raw meat, and the other one was fed cooked meat. The ones that ate raw meat had good litters; they were all healthy. The ones that had cooked meat, actually, the whole line died off within 4 generations, while the others were healthy. So the conclusion of the study was that human beings should eat raw meat. Okay. What I'm trying to say is that without any wisdom, you can reach that conclusion. That is not true. It's very dangerous for humans to eat raw meat, actually. But humans should eat raw food, fruits, grains, and vegetables. The more raw food you eat in its natural form, the more enzymes you'll get, because all enzymes are destroyed in cooking, and enzymes are anti-aging as well as excellent nutrition. So my point is that they can collect a lot of facts, whether it's in politics or whether it's in religion or whether it's in medicine. But you have to have wisdom to reach the right conclusion, and wisdom only comes from God.
Well, Dr. Day, I got to admit, this is why I keep putting off. I said, I got to write a book. I want to write a book about all this stuff I've learned, and I keep saying, no, I'm not ready. I've gained a lot of knowledge, but I haven't gained the wisdom to correct, to put something in writing that is permanent, that might change someone's life. So I keep putting it off. I keep learning new things, and I'm saying I'm glad I put it off. And so I don't know what the correct time is to actually come in and actually put my everything down on paper. But I do notice that a lot of people will have the cognitive dissonance of not allowing their written works to, their new information to challenge their written works, because then they'll have to go back and admit that they were wrong. And this is a great problem.
Well, that's called growth. If we don't learn from our previous mistakes, then we're fools. Right. So if they can't say, look, I was wrong about this, and go on with learning what's right, that's the problem with a lot of people, is ego and arrogance. They say, well, this is right because I wrote it and I will never change. Well, that's pretty ridiculous. Then I would never have learned how to get well, and I would never be sitting here talking to you right now, because I would say, well, I'm a doctor, I went to medical school, I know everything about health, and I would be dead because I didn't know everything about health. Yes. I, fortunately, as a trauma surgeon, I was spending time putting people back together who'd been shot and stabbed and run over and all that, and not giving out a lot of drugs except to put people to sleep to operate on them. But the thing is that I learned that everything that we're taught in our medical training is not right. It's wrong, and it hurts people. So we've got to move on. It's a powerful thing to be able to say, look, everything I believed and was taught is wrong.
Yes,
okay?
Yes. It's hard.
And I was one of them.
Yeah.
I'm no longer one of them.
Let's go back to your who rewrote the Bible. I want to play a little devil's advocate, I suppose you could say. I'm going to portray the part of Martin Luther King, and I'm going to challenge you right now. I want you to give me your best response to what I'm going to say. This is actually a quote from Martin Luther King, where he said, and this was an audience request, actually. He says, when we are inclined to boast of our position, we should remember that we are but Gentiles, while the Jews are of the lineage of Christ. We are aliens and in-laws. They are blood relative. They, meaning the Jews, are blood relatives, cousins, and brothers of our Lord. Therefore, if one is to boast of flesh and blood, the Jews are actually nearer to Christ than we are, as St. Paul says in Romans 9. God has also demonstrated this by his acts, for to no nation among the Gentiles has he granted so high an honor as he has to the Jews. For from among the Gentiles there have been raised up no patriarchs, no apostles, no prophets, indeed very few genuine Christians either. And although the gospel has been proclaimed to all the world, yet he committed the Holy Scriptures, that is, the law and the prophets, to no nation except the Jews. As Paul says in Romans 3 of Psalm 147, quote, he declares his word to Jacob, his statutes and ordinances to Israel. He has not dealt thus with any other nation or revealed his ordinances to them. What do you think of that?
All right, let's start at the beginning.
Okay, well, let me repeat. I just want to make sure that you understand my position here. When we are inclined to boast of our position, we should remember that we are but Gentiles, while the Jews are of the lineage of Christ. We are aliens and in-laws. They are blood relatives, cousins, and brothers of our Lord.
All right. Who was the first Jew? The Jews say Abraham was the first Jew. Well, Abraham came from Babylonia. He was Ur of the Chaldees. He was a Babylonian who moved to Canaan. How did he become Jewish? All right? Abraham wasn't a Jew. He was just a guy. He was just a guy who eventually knew God. And Abraham had Isaac. Abraham and Sarah both came from Babylon, Ur of the Chaldees. And people say, well, he was a Hebrew. Well, the word Hebrew just means to cross over. When Abraham and Sarah came from Babylon, they crossed over the Euphrates River. They also crossed over because they became believers in God rather than pagans. But they didn't get their genes changed. All right? So Abraham and Sarah gave birth to Isaac. Well, Isaac, how did Isaac become a Jew? He wasn't a Jew. And so Isaac was the son of two Babylonians who lived in Canaan. Then Isaac had twin boys, Jacob and Esau. Well, the Jews believe Jacob was a Jew. Yet Jacob and Esau came out of the same womb at the same time, and Esau is never considered a Jew. He's an Edomite. They consider him a Gentile. Well, how do you have an ethnic Jew and an ethnic Gentile as twins coming out of the womb at the same time? That's ridiculous. Jacob wasn't a Jew. Jacob's name was changed from Jacob to Israel when he stopped cheating and lying. All right? It was a heart, spiritual change in his name. His genes did not change. He didn't suddenly become a Jew. He was just a guy. He was the grandson, as was Esau, of two Babylonians. So his name changed to Israel, which means one with God. Jacob means supplanter. He lied to his brother. He lied to his father. He lied to Laban, his father-in-law. Well, Laban got him. He gave him the wrong girl for his wife the first time. And so he started reaping what he'd sown. But when finally he decided to change his life, and God told him to go home and make up with your brother Esau, and he did that, then God changed his name to Israel, which means you're no longer a lying, cheating thief. You now have repented and you're one with God. His genes didn't change. His heart changed. And so Israel means one with God. It doesn't mean that you're a Jew now. And so Israel and everybody who worshiped the same God was called an Israelite. They weren't Jews. There were no Jews.
Well, wait a minute. Now, I'm Martin Luther King. How dare you talk back to me, first of all. But second of all, I am a learned elder in the King James Bible.
Talk about your communist roots, please.
No, don't talk about my prostitutes either.
Okay. Or your philandering.
I am a learned elder in the King James Bible. All right? Do you understand? You claim that the word Jew is not in the Bible, so how can you use the word Jew?
Well, there are Jews now. There are Jews now, but they're not ethnically Jews. The Jews of today are actually Gentiles. They are descendants of Khazars of the Khazar regime from around the 8th century, when the Mongol Turks, who were Gentiles, accepted the religion and the culture of Judaism. So today's Jews are actually Gentile. They're barbarian Mongol Turks are their ancestors. So there was no such thing as a Jew in the Bible. There were Judeans and the nations. The word Judean meant one who worshiped the God in the temple in Jerusalem that was in Judea. And they worshiped Jesus Christ, who was from the line of Judah. So it's a Judahite or a Judean, as opposed to the nations, totally mistranslated Gentiles, the nations who know not God. The Bible defines it for us. The nations did not know God. The Israelites, the Judeans, did know God. It was not an ethnicity. It was who they worshiped.
Well spoken, well spoken. I'll think of a retort. In the meanwhile, we'll take about a 6 or 7 minute break for station identification. Here on RBN, here in the Corporation Nation. Stay with us.
Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel. Who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men. Machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are men. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful. Let us use that power to make this life a wonderful adventure. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. A world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Let us all unite.
Welcome back, folks, to the Corporation Nation radio program. I'm your host, Clint Richardson. And my guest today is Dr. Day of drday.com. We're talking about her book, Who Rewrote the Bible. Fascinating topic that I've, got to be honest, I've wanted to talk to people about, and yet it's so difficult to find someone that's actually willing to discuss the obvious differences between the original writings of the Bible and the, of course, government, basically, translation of the Bible, which government uses, of course, to rule over men. So it's a good subject. Dr. Day, we're kind of talking off air there a little bit. The question I actually posed the question to the host that comes on after me, Mr. Bob Tuskin, because he likes to talk about this kind of stuff, and I simply asked him, as coming from a Jewish family, I said, "What is a Jew?" Or what does it mean to be Jewish? I think was the question, and his answer was the most honest, concise, simple, easy to understand answer that I've ever gotten from anybody. And it was the brutally honest answer was, what does it mean to be Jewish? Oh, it's a business. That was the answer. It's business. So what does it mean?
Can be right.
What does it mean to be Jewish? And by the way, I got to correct myself. I was saying Martin Luther King earlier, and I meant to say Martin Luther, of which the namesake came, so I apologize for that mistake. It was not Martin Luther King who was saying that. It was Martin Luther, which kind of goes against a little bit of his other thoughts, and I think that's probably why they wanted you to comment on that, because he really kind of called out the Jews. But there again, we're saying the word Jew. What does that mean, Doctor?
Well, again, there are people who call themselves Jews now, and they're a very clannish group, and they've got an intertwining network greater than any other network in the world. There are good people in every group, and there are bad people in every group. And I say that on my website. I've got two websites, drday.com and goodnewsaboutgod.com. And I've got a lot of information about the Jews on goodnewsaboutgod.com. They are ruled by the Talmud, whether they're secular Jews or whether they're religious Jews. They are ruled by the Talmud, which is a series of their holiest books. I think there are 130 or something of these books that are written by revered rabbis. There's the Mishnah and the Gemara, two sections of the Talmud. And the Mishnah is written by rabbis that are idolized, and the Gemara is a bunch of writings between rabbis discussing what's written in the Mishnah. And in those writings, it says, even the best of all the Gentiles should all be killed. It says that Jesus is boiling in hot excrement in hell. And it says that a rabbi can have sex with a 3-year-old girl, and it is nothing. It promotes a lot of very bad stuff. So people say, well, you know, the Muslims will call for the death of someone who's not a Muslim. Or if they convert to some other religion, they can be killed in a Muslim country. Well, the Jews say the same thing. It says even all the best of all the Gentiles should all be killed. And what we know now is that the New World Order is primarily run by Jews. Now, again, I'm not saying every Jewish person is a bad person, not at all. But rather than saying, well, you people who don't agree with this, don't call them out on it, they should be calling their own people out on it. Again, the present-day Jews have no relationship to Old Testament Israelites. They have no business being in the land of Palestine now and calling it Israel. The present-day Jews are descendants of the Khazars who were Mongol barbarian Turks. They were Gentiles. So, interestingly enough, the Bible definition of a Judean, which has been shortened incorrectly to the word Jew, is one who knows God and worships God. And the nations know not God. They worship many pagan gods. Well, today the people who really worship God are really the Judeans, and those are mostly Gentiles that they call them today. So it's not an ethnicity. It has to do with who you worship. And it was that way in the Bible. It's the Judeans and the nations, and not Jews and Gentiles. The word Gentiles does not appear in the Bible. It has been written in by the translators who were determined to turn this whole thing around and try to make Jews into God's chosen people.
Do you happen to know
not people?
Do you happen to know the original word for Gentile that was used?
Nation. The word nation. Yeah. It's goy. It's actually goy in Hebrew, which has become a derogatory term by the Jews for what they perceive as Gentiles as goyim. Yeah.
Yeah.
In the Hebrew.
Well, so what do you say to Martin Luther saying that the Jews are literally the lineage or bloodline of Christ, and we are aliens and in-laws?
First of all, I don't. Someone would have to show me that Martin Luther actually said that, because Martin Luther was very hard on the Jews. He believed that they were Satan's people. So I'd have to read that to see that did Martin Luther actually say that. But Jesus was not a Jew. Jesus was God, and God is not Jewish. Jesus was not a Jew. He was a Judean. He was born in Bethlehem in Judea. He was a Judean. He worshipped the God in the temple in Jerusalem, which was in Judea. And this verse that says salvation is of the Jews is a total distortion of what the verse really says. The word of that is translated there is the word ek. The word ek, every other time it is used, the Greek word, in the rest of the New Testament, it is translated out of. The verse actually says salvation is out of Judea. And Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea. And so he came out of Judea and actually then lived in Nazareth. So salvation is from Jesus, not from the Jews. Okay? Oh, you see, when you can finally realize what distortion the translators have put into the Bible, then you can start figuring out who God really is. And he's not a monster who's going to burn his children in hell. You know, if you had a neighbor who said to his children, you know, you love me or I'm going to burn you to death, well, he would be arrested. But, this loving God. Oh, yes, well, it's loving God, but if you don't love him, he's going to burn you forever. How can that be a loving God? You know, I never bought that. I was raised a Christian, but I could never buy a God like that. I became an agnostic because I said, that's a horrible person. My parents disciplined me and my brother, but I knew they would never hurt us. But I was asked to believe in a God who had a lower idea of love than my earthly parents. So I said, that's not for me. And I became an agnostic, and only when I got sick and I was really facing death, I actually turned to God and I said, you know, if you're really up there, you know my heart. If you know my heart, I'm not going to lie to you. I really don't like you very much. Certainly not what the churches teach about you. And if you're not like that, show me. And he did.
All right, folks, stay with us. Dr. Day will be right back.
Wake up and look around you. We're lost in space and the earth is your home.
Scientists have been battling to understand what this unappealing object is all about. What the object is all about.
Information in the form of energy streams in simultaneously through all of our sensory systems in the form of energy. All of our sensory systems. And then it explodes into this enormous collage of what this present moment looks like.
All right, folks, welcome back.
And what it sounds like.
Here at the Corporation Nation. So, Dr. Day, I've got another question for you here, and this is my own question. Now, people like to cherry pick things, of course, out of court cases and out of stories, and they take quotes out of context all the time. Well, the Bible, unfortunately, is no exception to that rule. And single quotes taken out of context will be used to justify war. So here's one of them, depending on which version, but we'll go with the official King James Version, which says, ye worship, and by ye, I believe Samaritans is the correct word, ye worship ye know not what. So ye worship ye, you don't know what you worship. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. So they take this little part here. It says, for salvation is of the Jews. What does that mean?
What I explained. That's what I explained. The word of is actually in the Greek ek. Every other time it's translated in the New Testament, it's translated out of, not of. So its salvation is out of Judea. And that was Jesus talking about himself, because he was born in Bethlehem in Judea. He came out of Judea. And so salvation is of Jesus. He was talking to the woman at the well when he said that, who was a Samaritan. He says, you don't know what you worship because you have a false worship up here, but salvation is out of Judea. It is me. He was the one that told her he was the Messiah. There were only two people that Jesus told directly he was the Messiah, and that was the woman at the well, and the other one was the man born blind. He told them directly. He didn't even tell his disciples directly that he was the Messiah. Those are the only two people told.
What is the translation then of the word Messiah?
Well, it's Yeshua, but it's just I don't know what you're getting at. It doesn't matter what the translation Messiah is. It matters who he is. It matters who he is, and that is Jesus Christ.
What is Yeshua? I mean, I know that's probably a strange question, because I know what it is, but what did it mean?
It's Joshua. It's Joshua. There was no J in the Greek. There was no J until about the 17th century in any language. It was always Y. But Jesus, when he was on earth, he was called Joshua. Jesus, the word Jesus, is the Latin translation of the name Joshua. So Jesus was Joshua. So, but again, people say, oh, you cannot never talk to God and call him Jesus. You've got to call him Yeshua. Well, the thing is, God is the author of all language. If you're American, you can call him Jesus. You can call him whatever you want. That is a name of adulation. You don't have to call him something in Hebrew or Greek for him to respond to you. That's silliness. Again, that makes him into an arbitrary God. You think that a mother would say, if you don't call me mother, if you call me mom, I'm not going to answer you. That's ridiculous.
Well, it's interesting that you just said that God is the author of all language. I almost want to dispute you and say that there's an exception to that, and that is the horrific legal language.
Well, God is the author of all language, but man has corrupted it. Okay, man is good at corrupting things. Yeah, but the speech, the language people say God is the author of all science too. That doesn't mean he's the author of evolution. That's unscientific. But he's the author of all science. So if science does not agree with the Bible, then science is wrong, because the Bible is correct, the original translation of it.
Well, there you go. And then we have to go back to the original. When you say that, right, we have to consider that the original translation is what's being used, or not the original writing, I should say, not
the literal translation, literal from Hebrew and Greek.
And that's where everything gets so darn confusing, and that's, I guess, how wars get started. Well, let's switch gears here and talk about some of the research you've done with, and by the way, that book, Dr. Lorraine Day's book, can be found on drday.com, and it's who rewrote the Bible. I'm actually kind of interested in that myself, because Strong's Concordance is actually kind of a new tool for me that I've been utilizing lately, and it's really fascinating when you break down the words. But let's go back to these the school shootings, the shootings in the movie theater. I mean, there are so many quote unquote truths out there. I'd really like to know the reality of what's going on, because there's half the people say, of course it's real, it's on the news. The other half say, look, these people are still alive, they're crisis actors, the kids didn't die. In fact, there's a big old thing up here with the fact that the kid that was supposed to be buried up here in Utah, there was nothing in the coffin. There was no dead kid. His parents were actors. What's going on with this? What research have you done to show that some of these so-called domestic terrorist shootings or other forms of violence are perhaps not actually happening?
Well, the government just wants to scare everybody into giving up their rights. And people are so easily fooled, they'll believe what they see on the evening news. I can tell you from a medical point of view, you don't have to be clairvoyant. You don't have to be any of those things. All you have to do is, I'm a trauma surgeon. I can tell you that at the Boston bombing, first of all, the early pictures, and I have them on my website. If you go to goodnewsaboutgod.com and you scroll down, again, you'll see who rewrote the Bible there for sale, and then you'll see you can click on political truth. There are a number of red rectangular navigational buttons. Click on political truth. If you scroll down, I have categories for all of these things. If you scroll down far enough, you'll see a category called false flag attacks. All right? And in there, I talk about the Boston bombing, Sandy Hook, and I show you why the evidence shows that these were not real. They were drills. In fact, let's talk first about the Boston bombing. There are many interviews with people who were running in that race that said they were told over the loudspeaker system, this is a drill, this is a drill, this is a drill. All right? And then suddenly it's supposed to go live. I have pictures on my website showing that when the bomb first went off, it was a smoke bomb. when the bomb first went off and people were lying around on the sidewalk, there was no blood anywhere. There was no blood. Okay? Well, if people are injured, there's going to be some blood. Secondly, if you look at the people, you will see that they're all propped up on one elbow. Because they're really crisis actors, they don't want to be lying down on the dirty sidewalk, getting their head and their hair on the dirty sidewalk, so they're all propped up. Well, that never happens. I'm a trauma doctor. I take care of people who've been in bomb blasts and people who've been shot and stabbed and all of that. They don't just stay up on one elbow.
Well, now the first question I'd have is, what about the witnesses that would have been immediately surrounding that scene? All actors as well?
Oh, yes. They're people, perpetrators and actors, all right? So then the next thing you see blood. You see blood everywhere, except it's not the color of blood.
All right, well, let's continue that after the break. We have blood, but it's not blood. We have crisis actors. Stay with us, folks.
Your liberty, privacy, civil rights, and dignity. You want some more?
Is this real? Or is this just a ride? The world is like a ride. You think it's real? It's just a ride. We can change it any turn we want. It's only a choice between fear and love.
Here in the Corporation Nation, welcome back. I'd like to preface this conversation we're having right now by saying, I know it's very difficult for people out there to think in terms that, as Dr. Days is postulating, that these things were not real, that they were actions of government made to fool people. But I want to refer people to something that I wrote in all of my years of research, Boston Bombing, the Importance of Public Executions in Peacetime. Now, this article, it refers to something called the report from Iron Mountain. One of the most important factors in this is just the information that's in this report, because it explains why is it necessary. Why in the heck is the question that's going to be asked is, why would government do that? That's ridiculous. Why would government stage the killing of children just to scare people? Why would it do that? Well, listen, folks. Okay, the Iron Mountain report is about transitioning from an actual war system to a peace economy. In other words, can we live in peace and still have an economy? Because, of course, war is great for the economy. It says the war system not only has been essential to the existence of nations as independent political entities, but has been equally indispensable to their stable political structure. Without war and the war system, in other words, the economy created from war, no government has ever been able to obtain acquiescence in its legitimacy or right to rule its society. The possibility of war provides the sense of external necessity, referring to the law of necessity, which is what the president uses all the time in every executive order, without which no government can long remain in power. The historical record reveals one instance after another where the failure of a regime to maintain the credibility of a war or a war threat led to its dissolution by the forces of private interest or reaction to social injustice or of other disintegrative elements. Now listen very carefully, because this is the importance of the Boston bombing. Why? Because, quote, the organization of society for the possibility of war while at peace is its principal political stabilizer. It has enabled societies throughout history, please bear that in mind, this has been going on longer than just the last decade. It has enabled societies to maintain necessary class distinctions. It has ensured the subordination of citizens to the state by virtue of the residual war powers, again, presidential powers, in the concept of nationhood. What's this saying, folks? It's saying unless they scare you and provide you with what I call either real or false flag public executions to where you fear an external enemy at all times, even though no war is declared. We're completely at peace. You have to show in the media is so important to this document, you have to show that there is constantly a threat, and that's the only way that government has credibility to have a standing army, to have martial law at all times, can be declared at any time, and for the president to have emergency powers which nullify the Constitution according to Congress. This is so important. That's why I wanted Dr. Day to finish out the show today by talking about her research into how fake these things really are. Please continue.
So we've established, and you'll see if you go on my website and you go to false flag, click on goodnewsaboutgod.com, click on the political icon. That is a big red rectangular icon on the home page, and then you'll go there, and then you have to scroll down quite a ways until you see false flag attacks, and click on Boston bombing. I have over 100 articles there documenting what I say in what I have written. And you will see those pictures that when the bomb first went off, there were supposedly bodies strewn around, but there was no blood. And then later on, the blood appears. Well, the blood didn't appear from the people. The blood appeared from them dumping it all over the place, but it's clearly fake blood because it's bright orange. That is not what blood looks like. If there's anybody who knows what blood looks like, it's me. Because as a trauma surgeon, the most blood I've ever given to a patient is 227 pints of blood. The blood, this guy was shot 27 times, and the blood was coming out all over our feet and all over the floor. Blood does not look orange. When it comes out, it gets oxidized, and then it looks dark maroon. That's what color blood looks like on the ground, is dark maroon. Not only that, when this supposed fake blood settled for a while, it separated. And real blood doesn't do that. It doesn't separate like that when it's on the ground. You have to spin it in a machine for it to separate. But
so like an oil base, it separated, the compounds were separating?
Yeah, it's just paint, some sort of paint. So anyway, then they wheel this guy in a wheelchair who supposedly got his leg blown off, and you've got this big bone of his tibia sticking out with supposedly flesh hanging off of it. Well, it's not bleeding when they're putting him in a wheelchair. And I can tell you, nobody with an injury that severe would ever be wheeled in a wheelchair because he would have lost so much blood that he would have fainted if you sat him up. He has to be on a gurney. But they were wheeling him at a fast rate right through the crowd twice so the cameras could get him. And at one time, the prosthesis, which was supposed to be his partially blown-off leg, started coming off, and you'll see in the video somebody has to stop and put it back on. Now, the crisis actors, they didn't lose their leg in the Boston bombing. They lost their leg years ago in accidents and maybe in Vietnam or maybe in Afghanistan, whatever. These are all healed amputation
Sure, well,
stuff.
it's a niche market to be an actor with a missing leg, right?
And you find that if you go to crisisactors.com, you will see that they're asking in certain places for amputee actors.
Yep.
And then they can fit them with this prosthesis. I mean, it's all here on my website. It's all there.
Is that is crisisactors.com? Is that what it is?
Yeah. Go there.
There's several of them out there, but that's the one I was looking at. It's got some pretty bizarre stuff on there, I will say.
Yeah. And see, what people don't realize is these supposed drills go all the time because there's a federal law now that school districts, in order to get federal funding, have to have these drills all the time. And they also have training for new recruits in the military where they try to get them used to gunfire and all that. And they use these crisis actors to have, and they throw blood around to try to teach them how to save their fellow soldier and all that. All that's on my website. You can see those drills that are going on. So then why do they have to do a real mess like they did 9/11? They can just fake it and people believe it. People believe it. Some wise philosopher said, it's easier to deceive people than it is to convince them that they've been deceived. And that's very, very true. People want to believe their government. They want to believe their government loves them. They want to believe their government wants to take care of them and that the government is interested in their welfare. No, nothing could be further from the truth. The government doesn't like us. They want to be rid of us. And if you read a book called Death by Government by R.J. Rummel, you will see that more people in countries have been killed by their own governments than have ever been killed by invading armies from another country. So this is what governments do. Governments are not in the business of taking care of their people. Governments are in the business of not taking care of their people. You will see from Obamacare, Obamacare is not so everybody will have insurance. Obamacare is going to be the denial of care.
I agree. I mean, we've talked about that. I try to explain that to people about the nature of the nonprofit hospital. That right now illegal aliens can walk into a hospital and, an emergency room, of course, and get treated for their necessary. Right. But if you go in there saying, "I'm insured, look at me," that can actually deny you care because they're no longer in the nonprofit. And I wish people could grasp that by taking insurance, not that insurance has to be this way, but it's a for-profit model, so naturally it's gonna. Not really going to be a very good...
But even the nonprofits, think about the nonprofits. Blood banks are all nonprofit. But yet, many directors of blood banks are getting six-figure incomes. Nonprofit only means that at the end of the year, we don't have any profit because we put it all in our own pockets, given it to ourselves in salary. So nonprofits are really not any better than profit.
Yeah, what's funny about the nonprofit aspect is that they'll go ahead. They know they're not going to get money from anyone, but some people fall for it. They give it to a collection agency, and your $500 bill by then they stop collecting, becomes $10,000, and then they write that off. It's so funny. We'll be back, folks. Stay with us here in the Corporation Nation.
Neighbor, welcome again to this neighborhood. I'd like to show you something. You know what this is? Well, maybe if I press this button. There are so many things to learn about in this world, and so many people who can help us learn, and so many people who can help us learn. Did you ever grow anything in the garden of your mind? In the garden of your mind. You can grow ideas in the garden of your mind. In the garden of your mind. It's good to be curious about many things.
All right, folks, welcome back. Again, talking about a fairly controversial subject, which when you actually think about it and you really do look at these videos and pictures that we're talking about, it's actually not so controversial at all. In fact, it should be enough to push people over the edge. I don't know what it's going to finally take to push people over the edge to say, this is ridiculous. You're showing us pictures of murdered children that didn't actually... let's go to that. What about the school shooting that we just recently had in, what was it, Sandy Hook? Or was
Sandy Hook?
It? Yeah.
Okay, Sandy Hook, right. First of all, you will notice that the firemen and the police and all of the vehicles, ambulances, were not allowed even near the school. They were blocked by a bunch of cars, and the police were not out there getting those cars moved. The firemen and all the emergency people were far, far away. Well, that's not what happens when you have a huge tragedy such as shootings. It was supposedly the police who went in and said, "Oh, everybody's dead." Well, they're not even qualified to make that decision. They don't know. Oh, yeah, everybody's dead, so we don't need anybody else in here. Well, that's ridiculous. Then they said, first of all, the medical examiner who was supposedly doing the autopsies or in charge of doing it was absolutely a fool. He didn't know anything about anything. Whether he was real or a crisis actor, I don't know, but he was kind of sniggling and laughing. That's not the way a person behaves when they've got a tragedy like this. If he was real, it was because he was terribly nervous and sniggling like that because he was trying to say all sorts of things that weren't true, and he didn't even know where the bullets were on the children or anything like that. They said, I think this occurred on a Friday, and they said, well, the bodies aren't going to be taken out till Sunday. Well, that's absurd. That never happens. Bodies are taken out immediately, and people, some children who might be alive are rushed by emergency vehicles to hospitals. They're not declared dead by a few cops walking through the place. And so they said, we're not going to take them out until Sunday. Well, that never happens because the bodies start to decay. They start to stink. It's harder to find out how they died. It's harder to find out how long they lived after they were supposedly shot. And then they said, oh, no, we took them out Saturday night in the middle of the night. Well, why would they do that? They just told the press that they were going to take them out on Sunday so the press would go away. And then they said, oh, we took them out on Saturday night. Well, again, you've got crisis actors. On my website, I've got the Sandy Hook false flag attack, and you will see one of the supposed fathers of one of the children who was supposedly murdered, and he's laughing before he goes up to the microphone, and then he gives his speech.
That definitely went viral. I remember that myself, yes.
Of course. And so, and not only the little girl, supposedly his daughter, who was killed, actually showed up a few days later with Obama. You know, wait a second, excuse me?
Well, wasn't there also a picture? Girl. Wasn't there also a picture of them all at the, I guess was it the Super Bowl, or was it, they all the children that were supposedly killed were at the Super Bowl in celebration of the 1-year anniversary of the shooting or something?
Well, not only that, the woman who was supposedly the principal of the school who was supposedly killed actually showed up at the Boston bombing. They hired her for the next job, not realizing that some people would recognize her.
So, I mean, are we actually suggesting here that government sort of just says, like, why are we letting these drills go to waste? Why don't we actually use them in the media to...
Of course.
Is that? I mean, can it be that lame? I mean, it's really
they are
just
that lame because people will believe anything, and people don't investigate. They don't investigate. And you know, why do commercials work? Why do corporations pay I don't know how many millions for a 30-second or 1-minute commercial at the Super Bowl? If they say something over and over and over and over again, people will believe it. Just like they've got, you know, all these pictures of the airplanes coming into the Twin Towers. Well, the first one they showed of the airplane coming into the Twin Tower, it went clear through, and it came out the other side, and its nose was intact. Well, it's because it was photoshopped in. They had to take that one down real quick. I saw that one. They had to take it down real quick and then Photoshop that out. So they just keep playing this picture of the plane coming in. You know, at first I thought, when I was listening to this, when it first happened on 9/11, they were interviewing all these people on the ground. And they were saying, now, who are you? Well, I work for NBC, or I work for CBS, or I work for CNN. I thought, why are all these people who work for the media, how do they happen to be right down there at the time this is all going to happen? Well, because they were plants. And they were immediately to say, oh, we know that this is Osama bin Laden did this, or whatever, whoever did it. It's ridiculous. I mean, the government, look at how long they looked for Osama bin Laden. Well, Osama bin Laden died in 2001. He died. He had kidney failure. He was on dialysis. He didn't have anything to do with 9/11 because he was actually, I got pictures of him on my website as Tim Osmond. He actually worked with the CIA.
Sure.
And this just gave them the opportunity to say, oh, Osama bin Laden is here. Oh, he's over here. We'll go to this country and we'll go to that country. I mean, you know, this is the government that can't find a bleeding elephant in a snowbank. And yet, you know, they're looking all over. They can't find Osama bin Laden. Well, they got satellites. They can find anybody. They can find you and me. How come they can't find him?
They have found every mineral and substance and liquid and solid on Earth through ground-penetrating radar, I would think they would be able to find a high-profile character such as this. You're right. Listen, we're coming to the end of the show. I really appreciate you coming back. I actually quite enjoy having you as a guest. Why don't you tell people again about your websites and
you can
anything you want to...
drday.com and goodnewsaboutgod.com. I've got the book, Who Rewrote the Bible, which I think you'll find very interesting. I've got many other books there, too, one on the coming New World Order. I've got all sorts of health information and some even more controversial books that you will find there. So
yes,
on my website, I've got over 5,000 articles. So.
Yeah, incredible resource site, actually. What was the title of the book, Homosexual...
Who Wants Homosexuals Dead? And I show that the very people who are promoting homosexuality actually want them dead, and I show you why.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, again, thank you. Why don't you take us out? What if we've covered? Oh, how about do we take this all the way back to the Columbine shooting?
Yes, yeah. And by the way, both of those young men were on antidepressants. We could talk about that for a long time.
Well,
on how antidepressants cause homicide and suicide. And of
course, is that to say that was a real shooting then?
That was a real shooting. That was a real shooting. But that was before they realized they could fake it and people would believe it just as much.
So probably more of a, like we read from the report from Iron Mountain, probably more of a way to instill the fear. And of course, then you had the consummate Michael Moore coming along to promote, that it was
that
it was a
Moore
natural.
Is actually an insider who releases some truth with a lot of error, so people will believe the error and they won't be able to discern error from truth.
Well, I'm starting to think that's the rule more than it is the exception around the radio realm.
Yeah.
Radio and film realm. So.
Yes. So. There's a lot more to talk about. If you go to my website, you will see that anything that you want to know what's going on politically in America or has been for a long time and what the real truth is about it. So go there, goodnewsaboutgod.com or drday.com.
All right, folks. Well, I appreciate you coming on again. Let's see. Join me tomorrow for Ellen Brown of Web of Debt, ellenbrown.com. She's running for Treasurer of California. Should be an interesting show. And we have more guests. Patrick Jordan on Wednesday and Dr. A. Truett on Friday. So good week coming. Also, Hal Anthony's going to join me on Thursday with Bert. See ya, folks. Thanks again, Dr. Day.